So if you appeal to Russian chauvinism and you convince people that you're gathering the Russian lands or you're extending the influence of the Russian world or you're protecting against future aggression from the West,
they'll believe it.
They will believe it, especially since they don't have alternative sources of official information.
Mainstream media gives you the impression that there is nothing good about America. In direct contrast to that, my podcasts will prove by examples that America has always been and still is the land of opportunity for everyone.
Welcome to another episode in the series Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. My guest today is David Satter, a renowned journalist, author, and historian with very deep expertise on Russia and the former Soviet Union. But as you'll learn, like most successful people, he didn't get to be an expert overnight. David was born in Chicago in 1947 and educated at the University of Chicago and Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He started his career in journalism as a police reporter for the Chicago Tribune. He then moved to the Financial Times, where, because of both his journalism skills and his fluency in Russian, he was assigned to be the Times' Moscow correspondent at the height of Soviet power. After 6 years in that role, he joined the Wall Street Journal as their special correspondent on Soviet affairs. Well, that came to an end in September of 2013 when he was expelled from Russia, allegedly for committing multiple gross violations of Russian migration law. But according to the knowledgeable sources, he was expelled because of his very negative but true revelations about both communism and the Russian government. David has taught at Johns Hopkins University, the University of Illinois, and Hillsdale College, and he has held senior research positions at the Hoover Institution, the Hudson Institute, and the Foreign Policy Research Institute, where he is currently a senior fellow. He is the author of numerous published articles on both Russia and the Ukraine, and 5 books, all with very intriguing titles. I'm going to list them now. Age of Delirium, The Decline and Fall of the Soviet Union. Darkness at Dawn, The Rise of the Russian Criminal State. It Was a Long Time Ago, and It Never Happened Anyways. Russia and Its Communist Past. The Less You Know, the Better You Sleep. Russia's Road to Terror and Dictatorship under Yeltsin and Putin. And finally, the 2-volume set, Never Speak to Strangers. David is highly knowledgeable regarding the history of the Soviet Union prior to its demise in 1991. But he's not here today to give us a history lesson. He's here today to discuss current events, in particular the war in Ukraine and President Trump's attempt to negotiate a peace treaty between the warring parties. And we are very fortunate to have David Satter with us today to help unwrap it. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
Some of my viewers may have an interest in Russia over the past 40 years, how it expanded and became the Soviet Union, and then how it shrunk and became Russia once again. But I'm pretty sure that most of my viewers are far more interested in your thoughts about what's happening since Russia invaded Ukraine almost exactly 3 years ago. That war is the largest European conflict since World War II and presents dangers to far more than just to the Ukraine. The U.S. showed terrible weakness when it hastily withdrew from Afghanistan in August of 2021. Do you think that had any bearing on Putin's decision to invade Ukraine in February of 22, just 5 months later?
I think it was one of the factors that influenced that decision, but the preparations to invade Ukraine began much earlier.
Sure. Yeah.
Much earlier. the thing that's the hardest for people in the West to understand is that war for Russia is an instrument of internal policy. The Russian leaders use war in order to unite the population around their corrupt leadership. This was the motivation, actually, for the initial seizure of Crimea and the invasion of eastern Ukraine. And the full-scale invasion, which began in 2022, was similarly based on the desire to consolidate the power of a small criminal group in Russia. President Trump repeats very often, and we heard it again at the Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, that if he had been president, the war would have never taken place. It's not clear to me what evidence he has for that, but the preparations began much earlier and were influenced, in fact, by a policy decision that he made, which was to leave Afghanistan and to leave our ally in Afghanistan in the lurch. Now, President Biden completed the withdrawal in the worst possible way, but the fundamental decision to withdraw and to, in effect, to throw our allies to the wolves, that was made by Trump.
Right. Yeah. Months earlier, matter of fact, years earlier.
Oh, far earlier, because they began negotiating in Doha with, again, behind the back of the Afghan government, which, by the way, was an elected government. And the Afghan government had the status of most valued ally short of
like NATO,
short of NATO. And it's interesting that Ukraine aspired at one point to be given the same status that the Afghan government had. But when they saw the way in which we dealt with the Afghan government, they realized that that status wouldn't do them any good. So they dropped that particular demand.
You mean Ukraine?
Yeah, Ukraine did.
Yeah, okay.
The example, but even the example of abandoning our allies in Afghanistan and turning the place over to the Taliban was not decisive. The Russian government understands the mentality of Russian society, and Russian society is organized not the way Western society is for the benefit of individuals. It's organized as a movement, and that movement is easily consolidated around a cause, especially if that cause is identified as a nationalist cause. So if you appeal to Russian chauvinism and you convince people that you're gathering the Russian lands, or you're extending the influence of the Russian world, or you're defending Russian culture, or you're defending Russian speakers, or you're protecting against future aggression from the West,
they'll believe it.
They will believe it, especially since they don't have alternative sources of official information. And so this was long planned, and especially the events in Belarus, where Alexander Lukashenko was actually defeated in the election, but just falsified the results and was backed up by Putin. That, I think, was decisive in convincing them to go from a partial invasion of Ukraine to the full-scale invasion. So when our President Trump, repeats, as he loves to do, that the war would never have taken place had he been in office, this is just something he's making up.
Yeah. He believes that his power of negotiation or threat would stop Russia from invading. But that's
he could have stopped it. He could have stopped it, but he would have faced the same situation that Biden faced. To stop it, you would have had to declare a no-fly zone. That would have stopped it. But a no-fly zone means people should understand what that means. That means that if American aircraft are fired upon from Russian territory, you have to take out the
source of the missiles,
source of the missiles,
which would be attacking Russia.
which would be a direct attack on Russia. So now, if Trump would be serving the truth better if he said that had I been in office, I would have imposed a no-fly zone, and there would have been no invasion. That's, of course, even that is impossible to say with 100% certainty, but at least that would have, that would make sense. Whereas he's simply saying that,
It wouldn't have happened.
as the Russians have the saying is that they don't do it for your beautiful eyes, and for his beautiful eyes, they wouldn't have halted an invasion, which was in the works. Actually, it began in the works while he was in office. So, and then of course he lost the 2020 election, but nonetheless, this is something that has deep roots, and we don't do ourselves any favors if we underestimate that.
Well, I've read that Putin's military leaders, when the war started, they predicted an easy victory, that it would take perhaps only a month or two to wind down for them to win. It's been 3 years. How did they make such a huge miscalculation?
There's a process of internal lying that goes all the way up to the top, for one thing. Also, it's a tradition in Russia to underestimate your enemy. Russians have been underestimating their enemies for a long time. They underestimated their enemy in the Russo-Japanese War. They underestimated their enemy, believe it or not, in the Second World War. They underestimated the Finns in the Russo-Finnish War. They underestimated the Chechens in the First Chechen War, at least. So for them to underestimate an enemy and to predict an easy victory is not all that unusual. The plus the fact that the corruption and sclerosis in the Russian military is not something that Russians are anxious to report up the chain of command. The system operates on the basis of corruption. So because it's so fundamental to the way in which the Putin system operates, it creates its own blind spot. It's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, and it would be a very brave person indeed who would dare to say,
to point out that the tanks are falling apart and the planes aren't running.
That supplies have been stolen,
right?
That our technology is outdated, that soldiers are not prepared.
Well, over the past 3 years, the U.S. supplied approximately $120 billion. That's more than $1/10 trillion of aid to Ukraine, of which $66 billion was dedicated to security and defense. And it's been reported that EU member states collectively contribute another $140 billion. So did Putin's military fail to anticipate that high level of support, without which Ukraine would have fallen quickly?
They may have, yeah. They may well have underestimated, because they had every reason to think, as I thought at the time, that Joe Biden, who was adamant in opposing the delivery of Javelin missiles,
opposing the delivery.
Yes, he was throughout the Obama administration. The Ukrainians asked for Javelin missiles to protect themselves against mass tank assaults. That they didn't have the anti-tank weapons that they needed and that was one of the reasons why the Russians were able to take over the territory that they did in the east of the country before they stabilized the line of contact. It was because they faced mass tank assaults,
Right.
and that they couldn't stop them. and they asked for the U.S. to provide the anti-tank weapons, which is what the Javelin is basically, that would enable them to
Well,
resist.
why wouldn't we supply those? Those are clearly defensive weapons. They're not offensive.
I think we
right?
have to ask Joe Biden and Barack Obama.
That's
But
right.
the
It's
extreme,
Obama.
the extreme timidity and the unwillingness to take a stand on principle and say, "Listen, we're not going to tolerate any more aggression." We see that right now with Trump as well, by the way. But we can get to that. But I thought that Biden, given his record, would not respond the way he did. But I was wrong, and I'm glad I was wrong. And I'm glad that Biden, whatever his past record, did the right thing by providing Ukraine with the weapons that they needed to save themselves. And they did save themselves.
No, but you just said they wouldn't provide the javelins.
No, they didn't provide. This is when Biden was vice president. This is not after the. It was.
Me.
You see, because we're talking about several different periods here. When Trump became president, and to his great credit, in his first term, he authorized the javelins. That's one of the reasons why Kyiv was saved. But when Biden was running against Trump, there was every reason to believe that once, and then he won, as we know, he became the president. The Russians had every reason to believe that, given his past record, his record when he was vice president,
Yes,
and
would
the
continue.
the attitude of the Obama administration, that they had nothing to fear from the United States or the West, that they could just roll over Ukraine. And at first the aid was rather halting, but in the end it was substantial. Not substantial enough to help Ukraine win, as it could have been. I mean, but we can go into all those tactics at some other point in the conversation, but enough certainly to help Ukraine stave off a massive attack.
So in Biden's administration, did the Biden administration provide the missiles, the anti-tank weapons? Or not?
They provided a lot of very effective missiles, very
Okay.
effective weapons. I mean, a great deal of the javelins were the missiles that were authorized by Trump, actually. And in that was a very major thing.
He brought that up in the recent conversation. Yesterday.
He did.
Now, as of today, Russian forces occupy approximately 44,000 square miles of Ukrainian territory, roughly equal to the size of the state of Virginia, which is about 18% of Ukraine's total land area. Is it possible for Ukraine to regain that territory, either by negotiation or by military means?
Well, it's possible. It's possible that some of that territory can be regained militarily, and it's possible that all of the territory, or almost all of the territory, can be regained ultimately through peaceful means if we get a decent settlement now, because the Russian government is itself very unstable, and the regime could undergo changes. The important thing is not to recognize the annexation of those territories. I mean, we, for many years, didn't recognize the annexation of the Baltic republics. Eventually, they became free and independent. The point, I think, is, and I think Zelensky is right here, that given the present situation, it's the cost in lives would be such that it does not pay for any Ukrainian leader to try to force the issue and to liberate all of the territory. But they certainly need to protect the part of the country that is not occupied. and to create the conditions to recover the rest of the territory through diplomatic means. And there are various ways this can be done, including by imposing and maintaining economic sanctions, so that it eventually just doesn't become, it becomes too much of too burdensome for Russia to maintain these territories that it has absolutely destroyed.
Nobody living there anymore.
Well, there are people living there, but the conditions are horrific.
Now, soon after Trump's inauguration, his administration appeared to be solidly behind Ukraine. For example, in late January, just last month, Trump warned of imposing high tariffs and additional sanctions on Russia if President Putin didn't engage in a deal to end the war. And in mid-February, just a few weeks ago, Vice President Vance, in a Wall Street Journal interview which published, said that Ukraine must have sovereign independence, and he went on to say that the U.S. retains the option of sending U.S. troops to Ukraine if Moscow failed to negotiate in good faith. But soon after that, the administration's position of support started to wane. Although Trump proposed that Ukraine would receive additional military aid, there was a catch. His proposal linked future military support to Ukraine, providing the U.S. had rights to Ukraine's large deposits of rare earth minerals. And in making the matter even worse, it appears that Trump believed that the U.S. should get those mineral rights without any additional payment or conditions, viewing that the more than $100 billion of financial support that Ukraine received from the U.S. in the past was a payment for those mineral rights. And even more contentious was Trump saying on February 18th, following a meeting in Saudi Arabia, words to the effect that Ukraine started the war. And in a post just one day later, he called Zelensky a dictator. And 5 days after that, on February 24th, under Trump's direction, the U.S. voted with our enemies. We voted with our enemies, Russia and North Korea. We voted against a United Nations General Assembly resolution that condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine and called for the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops. What do you make of all this, David? Ukraine is an ally of the United States, which has been attacked by Russia, an enemy of the United States. Why didn't the U.S. vote for the resolution condemning Russia? But I want to hear your opinion on why it happened and the reason behind Trump's rapid and very significant change of position on Ukraine.
Well, I mean, first of all, he had been saying, even before he was elected, or rather before he took office, after he was elected, before he took office, that he was going to end the war in one day, that the war was ridiculous. Vance said that he didn't care who won the war. It didn't matter to him which side prevailed, whether the aggressor prevailed or the victim. Seemed to be that he didn't see any issue here. So there were plenty of statements, and he repeated ad nauseum the idea that, well, if I'd been president, the war would have never broken out. The point now is to end it and end the dying. But there was no mention of the only condition under which the war could really be ended, which was through the provision of security guarantees for Ukraine. It was always other people who would do that rather than the U.S. We would simply reap the benefits, including a deal for strategic minerals. My impression is that I've been writing about Russia and the Soviet Union all my adult life practically, and I've often been profoundly disturbed by the low quality of the advice given by persons who consider themselves expert, but I was never in a situation in which the very idea of expert advice was rejected and people were just saying whatever comes into their heads. And I believe that's what's happening now. The mood shifts one way, they say one thing, the mood shifts another way, they say something else. I don't have another explanation for it.
I think, couldn't it be because of Trump's obsession to make a deal to end the war, that he's softening up Zelensky to accept a very bad deal? Couldn't that be it? He's obsessed with, I got to make a deal. I'm the deal maker. I'm the best deal maker in the world.
I think he sees the war as a distraction, that his overall goal is to enrich Americans, which is fine. I'm in favor of that. I think people should be enriched. But there are other considerations also for a great power. Money is not the only thing, although it's clearly important. And he harbors vast resentment against the Ukrainians and against Zelensky for the role that, first of all, the role that was played in 2016, in which it appears there was some type of activity on behalf of on the part of some Ukrainians to tip the scales and against Trump on behalf of Hillary Clinton. Well, he won, and of course the failure of the Ukrainians to cooperate in the investigation of Hunter Biden, which in turn mushroomed into Trump's impeachment.
Right. I remember that.
So I think that, and then it was obvious during the blow-up in the White House that these resentments are not very far from the surface. When one of the reasons, as J.D. Vance attacked Zelensky when he said, we're not going to litigate this in front of the American people, but in fact he had made absurd remarks, and Zelensky was explaining truthfully that it's not so important, that
getting an agreement
is and a ceasefire is
he'll violate it
is no good if it isn't
backed by something.
If it isn't backed by something, and this was absolutely obvious, and he cited examples, and it was a normal response. But I think they had set it up to embarrass him, and afterward, of course, Trump said this made great television. He may have overplayed his hand. He may have, by attempting to, and there were 2 against 1, of course, shouting at Zelensky. Everything that Zelensky said was true. Everything that Trump and Vance said was either untrue or absurd or both.
Or insulting at any rate.
Or insulting. Yeah. For example, to say, why aren't you thanking us? What, you don't demand thanks in a formal setting like that. Zelensky has expressed his thanks to the Americans many times. It was a profoundly disturbing spectacle to think that people capable of such really unhinged behavior are now running the country.
Toward an ally. Not
only toward an ally. The idea that they should be grateful to us, we should be grateful to them. They're the ones who are losing
the blood.
They're losing hundreds of thousands of people, and
there was no sympathy for Zelensky or the Ukrainian people.
Absolutely.
There was no sympathy.
And it came after Zelensky had shown photos of the atrocities.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he had just gotten done showing.
Was that in the press conference too?
Yes,
I didn't see that part.
Yeah.
I didn't see that part.
So yes, it was before Bob. It was before the blow-up.
Okay, yeah, but but it was still in the public
setting.
setting.
Yes, it was in the Oval Office. He showed him, for the victims,
right? And Trump accused him, at least afterwards. He hates that guy Putin. Well, he should hate the guy Putin.
Well, and more to the and also I think the idea that he sees that and then he says, you should be grateful to us. What kind of statement is that? What kind of I was very disappointed to see Marco Rubio's extended defense. Of course, Marco Rubio could be fired tomorrow, so I mean, as he well knows.
But Lindsey Graham was the same. Senator Graham was
listen,
also.
I can't account for all of these guys, but it's painful for me to see this.
Making, complaining that that Zelensky isn't groveling. That's what they were complaining about.
Well, of course, yeah, you should grovel to us because we have all the cards.
Right.
But, Zelensky has some cards, too. He has the moral justification.
And I didn't like the fact that Trump talked about you don't have the cards. It's like he thinks it's a game. You don't make the analogy.
As Zelensky said, he said, I'm not playing cards.
Right.
So
frightening.
And Trump referred to the collusion hoax, which the Democrats foisted on the country.
But that wasn't Zelensky's fault.
No, but he said that Putin suffered as a result. But
that was nonsense. How did Putin suffer? Trump suffered from it. Putin didn't suffer.
Putin orchestrated.
He probably had a role in it, right?
The information came from the FSB.
I see.
The things that as someone who's dealt with this, it's
unsettling.
You can't imagine, Bob, what it's like to see these arguments back and forth between totally uninformed people who don't have the intellectual depth to really understand the subject about which they're opining and don't refuse to recognize that that's their fundamental responsibility. But anyway, we have got what we've got, and we have to do something about it. But the consequences for the United States now, if it's like we're on a San Diego freeway at 120 miles an hour, some guy who
just learned to drive.
Well, who not only
coming at us.
He just takes his hands off the wheels, shouting, at somebody else, and the car, it's in the middle of traffic, and it's.
Now, if Trump continues in this vein of not supporting Ukraine diplomatically, for example, in the vote against sanctioning Russia, and if the U.S. also withholds military aid, will Ukraine be able to continue fighting, or will it have to settle for a bad deal in which Russia probably retains the land that it currently occupies?
Well, I think that Zelensky has indicated that they're ready to cease the fighting along the existing line of contact, more or less, in return for security guarantees. Mm-hmm. As long as they know that the rest of Ukraine is safe. But that's what that's a guarantee that Trump doesn't want to give.
And without that, Russia will agree to a ceasefire, but then it'll advance.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. The Ukraine can't afford a ceasefire because they can't mobilize their society yet again to resist aggression from a much larger power. After they've
rearmed,
after that power has rearmed, and after the state of readiness has been lost, and then at the meeting in the Oval Office, J.D. Vance starts shouting, "Well, you're impressing people in the army by force." In Ukraine, they have to. They're doing the same. And does he not think that's happening in Russia?
Sure, and they're using North Korean soldiers.
Yeah, it
was painting him as the bad guy.
It was beyond absurd.
Right, painting him as the bad guy.
Well, this is it. I mean, the point here was you had on the one side a person who was speaking the truth, Zelensky,
Yeah.
and you had two people who were talking nonsense and trying to trying to use various forms of psychological pressure to impose that nonsense. Sort of, you haven't thought, you aren't grateful, for example,
And you're going to cause World War III. You're going to cause World War III.
You're disrespectful. These are what all of this in order to get to conceal the obvious fact that that what Zelensky was saying makes perfect sense.
Does Trump's unpredicted and, in my view, irrational and detrimental shift away from supporting Ukraine cause concern for our NATO allies?
Great concern. Great concern. Mm-hmm. Because they're the ones who are the most threatened. Mm-hmm. If Russia prevails, as it seeks to do against Ukraine, they may end up incorporating part of the Ukrainian army, which is the most battle-ready army in Europe, into their forces. Oof. And then the next step is to threaten NATO. Why do people believe that we can convince Putin that a country which was not willing to spend money to defend Ukraine will spend lives to defend Estonia? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We won't be able to convince him. And Estonia
is a member of NATO, right?
Yeah.
Estonia.
Does it mean that the NATO alliance then is going to be a thing of the past? It could be. We could say, well, you're on your own, folks. Okay, but then the day will come when we will need allies. And
Trump may not believe that. Trump may not believe that.
He may not believe it. He may not understand what it means, the gray zone of war. Mm-hmm.
Well, so far NATO hasn't been paying its share, right?
They're paying more and more.
Now they are.
They're paying more. So yes, there was definitely freeloading. There was definitely in that respect, some of what Trump says is in fact fully justified. Many of these NATO countries, seeing that their defense was taken care of, used the opportunity to spend on these profligate social programs.
Yeah.
That
or Green New Deal or whatever, or the greening of their countries,
or the greening of their country. Things that in fact we ended up indirectly subsidizing or even paying for. So as far as that goes, I think he was right.
Yes,
but the idea that we can make NATO membership or our willingness to defend NATO dependent on money ultimately, he seems blind to the intangible, non-material aspect of of Western cooperation and the ideals and principles that hold the West together and make it possible.
It's not just who's paying for it.
It's not just who's paying for it. What is critical here, what would happen if the U.S. simply decides to cut off all aid to Ukraine? If the U.S. says surrender or we cut off all aid, and the Ukrainians say we're not going to surrender, and we cut off aid, well, that's the end for the U.S. as a moral example to the world.
Right. And all of our other allies will...
that's the collapse of the Western alliance.
Right.
And
what'll Saudi Arabia think? What'll Israel think? What'll South Korea think? What'll Taiwan think?
Of course. All of these things are very important. And the fate of Ukraine will be terrible, and the anti-Western hatred there, which as a result of such a stab in the back, would be be very dangerous.
Now, my worry is if the U.S. pulls back from confronting Russia, from continuing to aid Ukraine, isn't that likely to embolden China to perhaps make moves against Taiwan, which has very serious implications for our economy and our military and our country?
Yeah, I think it does, and the Taiwanese certainly agree, because Ukraine has long been a recognized member of the United Nations, and Russia has repeatedly recognized the territorial integrity of Ukraine. There are perhaps,
and we're comparing that to Taiwan, which doesn't have representation, I assume, in the United Nations.
Not only that, but we've officially officially agreed there's one China.
Yeah. Yeah, on the other hand.
The protection of Taiwan comes from the fact that we're opposed to it being, China exerting its rights by force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, but once it's clear that we've washed our hands of a country that was fully recognized to be independent, how much credibility do we have in simply preventing China from reuniting with a province that we've already recognized is really theirs?
Yeah. Terrible story.
It is terrible. It is terrible. And
although we have far more economic dependence on Taiwan than we do on Ukraine. Far more. There's far more strategic importance to Taiwan than Ukraine appears to have.
Ukraine also has strategic importance for us because I think it's not fully recognized. But if Ukraine falls under the control of Russia, the strategic advantage that Russia will have vis-a-vis such countries as Moldova and the Baltic republics will be greatly enhanced. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. Russia is weak. It's corrupt. Mm-hmm. They are not a match for a NATO-style military. But they have unlimited numbers of lives that they can expend. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we might prevail, against their human waves, but it would cost us. Are we, after giving up Ukraine, are we going to pay that price to defend a country just because we've said, well, this was NATO, this wasn't?
It doesn't sound likely to me.
It doesn't sound likely to me either, and I don't think it's perceived will be perceived as likely by the Russians.
The conversation that you just watched was recorded less than a day after the tumultuous meeting at the White House between Zelensky, Trump, and Vance. We've recorded this update to our conversation because new and very pertinent information came to light in the past few days. This information markedly changed my view, and maybe other people's view also, about the argumentative meeting that happened in the White House. Was it, as the Democrats claim, an ambush by Trump and Vance? Or was it a setup by Zelensky, who was urged by the Dems to try to make Trump and Vance look bad on camera? David, I watched the video of the meeting at the White House a few times, and frankly, I felt sorry for Zelensky. He was outnumbered, and neither Trump nor Vance seemed to have any compassion for the man whose country was invaded by Russia and which has lost hundreds of thousands of its citizens in the past 3 years of war. But I didn't have all the facts about events that preceded that meeting. Fill us in.
Well, a couple of points. I think, I'm in Washington, but I've been talking to people also in Kyiv and in Moscow. And the version that is being put out in Washington is by the Trump administration, by people who are close to Trump, is that you didn't see you don't know the whole story. What you saw on camera is uh, not not really what happened. That in fact Zelensky was trying to change the terms of the agreement. Now, of course, no one watching on television knows what happened off camera. I don't know either. Uh, and we don't know if their interpretation is correct either. All I know is what I saw on TV. And what I saw, I think, fits into a pattern of events that we see unfolding now. If we look at the last 4 days, what do we see? We see the confrontation in the Oval Office. We see the decision to halt arms shipments to Ukraine, and now the decision to halt intelligence cooperation with Ukraine. All of which, so if you put those three things together, what took place in the Oval Office, the halt in arms shipments, and the halt in intelligence sharing, it looks like a concerted effort to force Zelensky to accept the terms of a ceasefire that Trump is trying to put together urgently. When he came, even before he came into office, he said that this would be done very, very quickly. He said that he would, first of all, he said that the war would be settled before he was even inaugurated. Then he said it would be done in one day. Well, now it's several weeks and months, but he's in a big hurry. Zelensky can't afford to be in such a hurry because it's the life of the nation and his own life physically. He could easily be killed under conditions in which Russia dominates Ukraine. So I think that what we really have in front of us is a strategy for negotiating, which in my view is flawed. The idea being that we give all our concessions to Russia. Russia gets a halt in military assistance to Ukraine, the embarrassment of or denunciation of Zelensky publicly, and in return, we're going to ask Putin to give us some kind of an agreement that we can say has put an end to the conflict. Now, in fact, this is the exact opposite of the way that you negotiate with Russia. And if it's the
opposite, David. One second, and it's the opposite because we've already shown our hand. That we've
already made our concessions. We've already shown our hand. But it's interesting that Trump today also showed how to negotiate with Russia. But he demonstrated it not in relation to Russia, but in relation to Hamas. He said, you have 1 week to free the hostages or all hell is going to break loose. Now that's the way to negotiate with Russia. If I were advising Trump, what I would tell him is Zelensky is our ally. Zelensky is not a danger to the United States. Zelensky is fighting our fight. What you need to do is intimidate Russia, and you can do it. You tell him he has 1 week to evacuate Ukrainian territory. Otherwise, to use his phrase, all hell will break loose.
But you don't believe that Putin is going to give up the land that they already occupy, do you? Is that what you think the end result?
He will give up anything that he is forced to give up. This war will end when the person who started it realizes that he has more to lose from continuing the war than he does from pursuing it. And we have historical examples of this. I'll give you one very good example, which was the first Chechen War. Nobody thought that 1 million Chechens could defeat the Russians. But because of their superior military tactics, they basically encircled Russian forces in the capital city of Grozny, which is the capital city of Chechnya, and were ready to annihilate them. And at that point, President Yeltsin, it was Yeltsin at that time, not only agreed to pull out his forces from Chechnya, which he said he would never do, but he did it ahead of time. I can, Bob, I wonder if I can get your permission to tell you a story. How
Of
do you feel
course.
about that?
Of course.
I think you're the kind of, my view of you is that you're the kind of person who likes a good story. Uh, and I tell you out from my own life. I was on the train from Moscow to Helsinki in the dark days of the Soviet Union, carrying a document which was vital to the lives of a group of people and which I simply could not allow to fall into the hands of the authorities. So I put it in my jacket pocket because I knew that there was an informal practice not to search the jackets and the clothes of foreign correspondents. Now, I don't know if they were tipped off or not, but they came into my compartment at the border and demanded my jacket. Uh, and I told them nothing doing. I want to call the American embassy. And they made a gesture as if to spit and said, "Ha, American embassy." And they said, "Give me the jacket." And I said, "If you want the jacket, you're going to have to take it by force." And they said, "Oh, all right." And at that point, they gathered in the corridor, walked down to the end of the corridor. They said, "We'll be back." And then for 5, 10 agonizing minutes, I waited there. And finally, not 2 border guards, but 3 came. But this time they were all smiles. And they said to me, "Oh, you wanted to call the American embassy." And I, grasping the situation, said, "Yeah, well, maybe that was a little extreme," forgetting the fact that I threatened to fight it out with them. And they said, "Here's your passport." And they didn't even check my bags.
Wow.
So, if you stand up to them,
Yes, but I
you'd
hear
be
what you're saying.
surprised.
But David, we've through Ukraine's fighting with our weapons and other weapons supplied by the EU, we've been standing up to Russia, and it's gotten us nowhere. And we've spent,
Well,
I think it's $120 billion. So Trump is tired of spending money on this. So what kind of threat can we make? We've been on Ukraine's side for 3 years and not getting anywhere.
First of all, Bob, I can't agree that we haven't gotten anywhere. Not a single major Ukrainian city has been taken. The goal was to occupy the entire country. They have held the line.
Okay, I'll take it back. So, but still, Russia's still controlling. I think it turned out to be 18% of the Ukraine.
About 18%, but that changes a little bit day by day. But the point here is that we have not done everything that we could do. For one thing, the permission to attack targets inside Russia came at the very last minute. That should have been the immediate. We put such restrictions on our arms that Russia was able to mobilize in the areas where they knew they would not be attacked and use those as staging areas to attack Ukraine. But the most important thing we can do is drive down the price of oil. And that if we do that and we impose real sanctions, secondary sanctions, and we give them permission to use Tomahawk missiles, we have all the cards. But to put an end to this, and we have to do it. We have to do it because otherwise the entire deterrence posture of the United States is going to be threatened. And better to fight them in Ukraine than to fight them in Estonia or to fight them elsewhere. And God knows we don't want to give a signal to the Chinese that they can take Taiwan and that we won't react. Deterrence, this is the thing that people don't understand. And this was why the withdrawal from Afghanistan was so catastrophic. That one the actions in one part of the world have an effect on what happens everywhere else. Uh,
Yeah, but you're
and
arguing for strengthening Zelensky or the Ukraine. I won't make it personal. Strengthen the Ukraine, but we're doing the exact opposite. We're doing the exact
we're
opposite.
doing not only were we doing the exact opposite, we're demoralizing our allies. We're demoralizing the people who are fighting for their survival. We're undermining faith in the United States as a country with ideals. And the keystone of our entire structure is our ideals. And we're jeopardizing our future security and this future security of countries that are devoted to us and that have been our most loyal allies.
So, do you think that Trump has allowed his personal animosity towards Zelensky for one reason or another? He clearly doesn't get along with him. He's allowing that to affect his judgment regarding how to deal with.
Bob, I don't know all the details. There's a lot of scuttlebutt here in Washington. But from what I'll tell you, what I'm hearing, from what I hear from both actually from both the Republican and Democratic side, is that is really the reason for the animosity. That I have a certain authority here because I was the first person to point out that the Trump collusion hoax was phony. That the Democrats were providing false information given to them by the FSB, and that they didn't care how they were wrecking the country. Now, Trump, this was also interesting. In his Oval Office meeting, he said that I suffered and Putin suffered during the Trump collusion hoax. It was a hoax.
I heard that, and I didn't understand how Putin suffered.
Well, how he could say that, that means he doesn't understand that the hoax came from Russia. It came from the FSB. When BuzzFeed in 2017, just to give you a little extra explanation, published the Steele dossier, Americans, many, were seeing it for the first time. But I was reading something that I had read for years, for decades. I know, KGB, their language, I know their tactics, I know the way. They didn't even bother to change it much. They were so confident they could fool a gullible American public. And so that's why I wrote in National Review that this Steele dossier is absolutely phony. And then CNN, they did a broadcast in which they say Steele dossier partially confirmed.
Oh, partially
you have to
confirmed.
Be a total idiot to say something like that, because all of Russian disinformation does contain some truthful information so that you will believe the false information. Anyway, so you see, a country without intellectual depth, without seriousness in relation to a dangerous country like Russia, was ready to swallow this hoax. And as you know, we spent 3 years. And then 51 so-called intelligence agents, when they got the Hunter Biden laptop,
said it was
for career reasons and with a complete lack of ethics, insisted that this was Russian disinformation. So, in other words, when they got Russian information, they didn't understand what it was. And when they got something that was genuine, they called it Russian disinformation.
Okay, so get back to Ukraine, because
but let's get back to so Trump is was obviously embittered, and in a way I don't blame him.
Embittered about what? This has nothing to do.
Who wouldn't be? And then so all of this has left it, but none of it should be a factor in the Russia-Ukraine situation. This is clear aggression, and acts of mass murder of innocent civilians. It should never, it needs, Trump says that he could have stopped the war. Well, he can stop it now, but he can't stop it the way he's going about it. He's going to guarantee that it'll get worse. He can stop it by doing exactly what I said, which is, making clear, stop it now or all hell will break loose.
Now,
And
we're clearly in the other direction right now. So
we're absolutely.
okay.
And to think that
my
Putin
question,
is going to stop it out of gratitude.
Will
I mean,
Will England and France or other countries fill the gap, the gap in funding and in equipment and in intelligence? Can they fill the gap?
partially. And here I think Trump has really achieved a great deal. And we need to give him credit where credit is due, that he has convinced the allies now that they cannot just, take advantage of our defense shield. They have to contribute. But there are certain things like the Patriot missiles. There are 6,000 satellites that cover Ukraine and that protect Ukraine against air attack, either by plane or by missile. If those satellites, if that satellite information is turned off, the whole country is vulnerable. If they don't, if Ukraine does not have Patriot missiles, then Kyiv can be attacked with Iskander short-term missiles. The Russians, the Iskander can't reach Lviv or on the western border, but it can. They can hit Kyiv, and so I mean, what's happening is the administration is playing with fire. And
so look, Zelensky is trying to turn this back around, right? Today,
of course.
Today was reported that he's prepared to sign the deal as it was, and this is not the deal for a ceasefire. This is the deal on the minerals.
Yeah, but we shouldn't even be talking about that deal. Because that's not. I mean, it's great. Let's do a deal. Let's cooperate economically, but that shouldn't be a condition for defending a country against aggression. And see, what happened is that so many of our pseudo-educated people were spouting so much nonsense that the people who came into the Trump administration said, well, we don't need any expertise. Instead of saying, well, these are bad people, or these are people who are abusing their position, but of course we need genuine expertise. They're putting people into office who say that we don't need anything at all. In fact, if we go back to that confrontation in the Oval Office, there's one moment when Vance said to Zelensky, he said, you're dragging people off the streets and sending them to the front lines. That's in fact not true. I mean, they're checking that, everybody has to register for the draft. The country's been invaded. If you're stopped on the street and you can't show your draft registration, you have to go and get a medical exam and you have to be registered. That's all. But every once in a while, a policeman overreacts. Somebody has a cell phone, and Russian propaganda is recycling that night and day. They don't show what they're doing, how they're recruiting murderers and prisoners in the labor camps, and how they're paying enormous amounts of money to people so that they basically get slaughtered. But this they do put out. And so Zelensky then said, have you ever been to Ukraine? And he said, no, but I've seen pictures. And Zelensky said, well, you should come to Ukraine. He says, no, I'm not going to come because it's a propaganda show. So it's the question of, well, if you've never been to Ukraine, how do you know it's a propaganda show?
No, he meant by dragging him there, it would be for propaganda purposes. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong. Well, if Americans don't understand how serious this is.
People go through Ukraine. They are not they don't have the time to they do not control visitors like North Korea. You're free to go anywhere you want. I know this. He's free to go to, just as I did. He's free to go to the Ukrainian Catholic University. I spoke there. He's free to go to Kiev Mohila University. I spoke there. He's free to go to, he's free to visit the frontline cities. He will talk, they will talk to him because he's vice president of the United States. But by making a statement like that, he's saying, and spouting Russian disinformation that he doesn't understand and where he's not informed. Of course, he's going to provoke Zelensky, who's going to say, what is going on here? And this is not just Vance. This is Robert Kennedy Jr. This is other people. It's Tucker Carlson. There is a huge Russian disinformation effort working day and night against the United States and recruiting gullible idiots to repeat all their falsehoods. And if you look, I'm sorry to be rude, but if you look at Vance, Donald Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson, I don't know who else, various others, Robert Kennedy, they say the same thing. It's a script. They've been provided with a script. And since everyone hates Ukraine because of because of the partisan conflict in this country, people are ready just to read the script. Tucker Carlson is not an expert on Russia. Neither is Robert Kennedy, or neither is Donald Trump Jr.
No, none of them.
And you have to be an expert to really, because their propaganda is clever.
But look, give Trump his due. He knows that Russia started the war, right? He knows that. And he knows that Russia is an enemy allied with our other enemies of China, North Korea, and Iran, right? He knows that. So maybe.
Well, but here's the thing. Here's the thing, Bob. There's talk that Trump has in mind trying to split the alliance between Russia and China, make Russia an ally of the U.S. And Russia will work full time to make him think that that's possible. They say, you abandon Ukraine, and listen, we will change our relationship with China. And at the end of the day, we'll find that it was all empty words. And that they.
But you don't believe that, or do you believe that Trump is going to abandon Ukraine? Do you think that's going to be the deal that he's going to get with Putin? Because you could end the war that way, I suppose. You cut off all supplies to Ukraine and Russia takes over Ukraine. It ends the killing.
It won't end the killing. It's just the beginning of the killing, because it'll be a new war. But do I think that he intends to abandon Ukraine? I hope not. But everything he's doing is moving. It gives me reason to believe that that's what I think what he intends to do is get an agreement that will make him look good, that will give Russia time to rebuild their military for a new war. But that will take place after he leaves office. I think he will settle not for an agreement, but for the appearance of an agreement.
Well, it'll be a ceasefire, right? It's not going to be a peace agreement.
I can tell you, Ukraine will not agree to that.
What is the future relationship between America and Russia? What do you think that is? Or what do you think it's going to be?
Well, I can tell you what I would like to see. And then I'll tell you what it looks like. What I would like to see is America force an end to this aggression.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
Participate in the rebuilding of Ukraine and making it they have a strong army, which will then be on our side. They have the strongest army in Europe now, and properly trained and oriented toward democracy, they will be a very staunch ally of the United States in everything that we do. And what I would like to see is, as a result of the defeat of this aggression, the beginning of hope for democracy in Russia itself.
Boy,
because bear in mind,
that's really far off. All right, that's what you'd like to see. Is that what you?
That's what I'd like to see. Now, what do I think I'm going to see?
Right.
That's your second question, right?
Yes. Yes.
What I fear is that Trump will try to bring overwhelming pressure on Ukraine to accept a flawed agreement, which will put Ukraine in danger, and in the end will not solve the problem. For example, he says, well, if we have our engineers, our workers there digging for minerals, Russia's not going to attack. Well, Russia wasn't bothered by the fact that they had to invade through Chernobyl on their way to Kyiv, an active nuclear site. With all of the risk of nuclear contamination. So they're going to worry about, they will ask them to get out of the way, possibly. Or if they say, well, Russia will not invade if there are, European troops there. That's also not true. It depends on what those troops are instructed to do. Are they instructed to resist if Russia advances? If so, Russia won't agree to that kind of a treaty. I mean, their goal is to destroy Ukraine. They are ready, for the sake of Donald Trump and for his political situation, to disguise their ultimate objective a little bit. But the fact that, this is no way to negotiate with Russians by giving them everything in advance and then, humiliating your ally and threatening to stab them in the back, and then expect, well, Russia will be grateful. They won't be grateful.
Mm-hmm. They'll want
more. They will take everything that's given and go for more.
Okay, David. Thank you once again for spending time with me today to share your insights on this rapidly changing situation.
It is.
The war in Ukraine.
Thank you, Bob.
If you want to learn more about David Satter and his work, you can go to his website, davidsatter.org, all one word. Additionally, you can follow him on social media platforms, including X, under his handle @DavidSatter. If you enjoyed this episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, please subscribe and you'll be automatically notified of future podcasts in this series.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.